All right, friends, welcome back. In this module, we are going to be talking about storing your baked goods. If you're anything like me, you hate dried out baked goods, but you also aren't going to be baking every single day of the week. Now, that is one of the biggest struggles with gluten-free cooking and baking in general, is that things are going to dry out much quicker than their wheat counterparts. And the reality is, even homemade wheat bread is not going to last as long on your counter. It's just, we don't put the preservatives in them. Things are not going to last as long. So here's how I store my baked goods to ensure freshness when we want to eat them. I am a big proponent for freezing your baked goods. Here I have Exhibit A, cookies that I have made. A big Tupperware like this works great, but really any size Tupperware or glass container or a baggie. Ziploc freezer bags are also a great option. Now these are the pumpkin breakfast muffins, and every time I make these, I let them cool and store them in Ziploc baggies. And we'll talk about in the next module how to reheat these things for using. So right now we're just talking about storing. So a Tupperware container, a Ziploc baggie, or a glass container with lid is also a great option. Now, I should note, they do make reusable ones of these now, but I reuse my own plastic, or reuse my plastic bags. I don't throw them away every time. So here I have an entire pan of cinnamon rolls. And again, in the next module, I will talk about how we're going to reheat these and some variations of that you can do as well. So I absolutely recommend freezing your baked goods. I do not recommend putting them in the fridge, except for the cupcakes. If you are making them the day before, they will do okay to put them in the fridge for a day at max. Otherwise, they do start drying out very quickly. They are best fresh, hands down. If you're putting things in the fridge, they tend to get stale. They do not keep as well. The freezer is absolutely your best bet. And when freezing the toasting bread recipe, I highly recommend slicing that bread once it has cooled. Slice that bread and then put it sliced in baggies that's easily accessible. Now, I used to slice and freeze, 4 to 6 pieces or however many I could fit in a quart Ziploc bag. Now, since I reuse my bags, I just put 2 pieces in each Ziploc bag because that's what we eat at a time. But that's up to you how you portion them out. It's just easier when you're trying to take them back out. So slice your toasting bread before you freeze it. Otherwise, everything else can really just be popped right in the freezer. And let's actually just talk through each recipe in the Gluten-Free Made Simple recipe book. And I will tell you how I freeze or store that recipe. And that way you'll have all of those on top of the course recipes here. So blueberry breakfast muffins, I would freeze just like the pumpkin breakfast muffins. Chocolate chip banana muffins, those ones actually store pretty well on the counter. Now, the pumpkin and blueberry breakfast muffins, they can be stored on the counter for a couple days and be just fine. But we like to have, just 1 or 2 a morning, so I double the batch and just freeze. The cornbread, I definitely recommend freezing those if you're not going to eat them right away. They will dry out on the counter. Same with the toasting bread. And the apple cinnamon bread, you could leave that one on the counter for a day or 2. Otherwise, I would put it in the freezer. Again, I would recommend slicing that one before freezing it, but you would not have to. And of course, if you're making that into muffins, you wouldn't have to slice it. The oatmeal chocolate chip cookies and the chocolate chip cookies and the lactation cookies. All our cookie recipes in the Gluten-Free Made Simple recipe book all do store on the counter for, I would say, a few days just fine. Like a typical cookie, they will dry out a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily, isn't always as big of a deal with a cookie. I do recommend, however, if you're going to keep them for longer, to store them in the freezer. I baked a lot of cookies the other week, so we definitely store them in the freezer and just take them out as we wish. The other things in the Gluten-Free Made Simple recipe book, the pumpkin bars, those can stay on the counter unless you're going to store them for over, I would say 3 to 5 days. Then I would put them in the freezer. Pancakes, I suggest putting those in the freezer if you don't eat the whole batch. And the cinnamon rolls, I do suggest putting those in the freezer if you don't eat the whole batch. They will dry out on the counter. So that is all the recipes in the Gluten-Free Made Simple recipe book and how I would store them.